think it's crazy, the term drugs in general. Like, the word drugs, like, it's such a nothing word. Like, it encompasses like, anything from coffee to DMT to tobacco, like, that's such a word that just encompasses way too much. You say something's a drug. I mean, when you do, like, a psychedelic, is that a drug? You know what I mean? What is that?
Well, you could drive down the street and see like a sign on a store that says drugstore. It's like the Carlin bit where he says like you drive down the road and you see a sign and it says drugs, like real big. But that means something different than if you say that somebody is addicted to drugs. Like we use the same word for two different things or for a multitude of different things.
Yeah, well, exactly. Because like, you think about it, almost everyone you know is addicted to a drug, something. Like caffeine, that's like almost everybody you know, probably addicted to caffeine.
Caffeine,
But
nicotine,
it casts this umbrella to then determine something to be illegal.
that's how it's used. Yeah, it's used to like it seems like it's used the word is used to deem something like able to be regulated by your government because you as an individual and as a collective aren't responsible enough to use it correctly or something like that.
Yeah,
Therefore, you shouldn't use it at all.
because the government is daddy, and daddy has to tell us what we can and can't do.
Which is why, like, I understand, like, the perspective of bigger government because you want regulation on certain things, but government can overreach dramatically when given the opportunity. And when it does overreach successfully, those things stay in place. Like, they don't take away their own right to control. They just take more rights from the individual
Yeah,
as government gets bigger and bigger.
that's why big government is bullshit.
To a point, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. For some things, I think there needs to be, like, intense government regulation because there's a lot of stuff that we don't involve ourselves with on the day to day. Like, when it comes to Wall Street and stock markets and the way that things move, logistically, we don't really have a stake or any kind of knowledge in that. So in terms of that, I think you do need some government outreach to make sure that these things are regulated and done correctly. But when it comes to individual human rights and like what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do, that's where the line needs to be drawn, I think.
Well, yeah, you give them an inch, they take a mile. That's what they do.
And they keep that mile. They never give that mile
But the
back.
the crazy thing is, I mean, it kinda just goes in the face of what I just said, is the fact that now they're starting to, legalize weed everywhere, basically. Like, it's something you think once they had that, they weren't gonna give it up. But, now they're starting to legalize weed, and what Oregon has pretty much everything is legal in Oregon, right? You can do, like, heroin out there. It's insane.
Well, I think they're in a transitional process right now. Like for instance, one thing that they're doing is they're instituting this program for training people to facilitate psilocybin mushroom ceremonies, and you don't have to have any sort of formal education. You don't have to have a degree. You can just be some random Joe Schmo from the street and go into the certificate program, take it, and then you're able to facilitate these experiences, which I think is really cool.
It is cool. I mean, should you have to do anything in order to d you know what I mean? Should you have to do they have to take, like, a class or a course, or and then what, you get a certificate?
Yeah, basically, which says like you're allowed to legally do this as like a maybe not like as a practitioner necessarily, but yeah, as like a practitioner, you're able to facilitate these experiences for people. And I think that's very cool because it gives like the regular person the opportunity because man, you shouldn't I want to be careful how I say this because I understand the medical method of making drugs legal. Cannabis started off with a medical model, and then when they realized that they could start to make a lot of profit from cannabis, that's when you see like the recreational um, laws changing. So if psychedelics can take the same route, it seems like they're more effective for more ailments medically, and hopefully that leads to like a recreational type of law change.
Yeah, with psychedelics, it's weird because they go so far beyond recreational. I don't know, I got a question for you anyways.
Hmm.
So do you think that all drugs should be legal?
Yeah, I do.
All drugs.
I think all drugs should be legal and regulated because for a few reasons. Two main reasons. Number one, because if you want to control crime, you control drugs. Drugs are have been intertwined with the problems that we have in our cities, especially forever. It's always been about drugs. And, people like the need for a cartel only exists when you can't go down to the corner store and buy your drugs.
Mhm.
And also with it's another positive part of regulation by the government because you would be able to get something that you know exactly what's in it. You're not going to get anything that's cut, because the dangers of drug use usually come from impure substances or like dosage disparities.
Yeah, that's true. Could you think or make a case for one drug you would think that shouldn't be? Or because I know you just said all of them, but I'm trying to think, then what was the argument to make a drug illegal? I mean, they is it I think they use the guise of empathy, like, they care and like, "Oh, we don't want people destroying their lives, this and that," but I think it's pretty much safe to say that making something illegal doesn't stop anybody from doing it.
Think it destroys more lives because you're throwing people in cages for things that they shouldn't be thrown in a fucking cage for. Like,
Yeah, I probably, like, in the future, it's gonna be looked at, like, completely barbaric to put somebody in a cage for, even if just for doing a drug, like, a non-violent offender, just, like, taking drugs is enough to get I mean, look at it now, like, now they're starting to release people, but there are people in prison for smoking weed, not selling weed, not just smoking weed, and that's, like, crazy, but, 10 years ago, that wasn't that crazy to think about.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it is good because trends are going in a positive direction. But man,
Could you imagine being fucking locked up just for smoking a blunt?
I could not imagine. I
For,
could
like yo,
not.
they used to lock people up for, like, 70 years if you got caught with a joint.
Yeah.
That's fucking
I
crazy.
think Tim Leary had like a little over an ounce of weed in his house. They busted in his house in the middle of the night and they took him away and they sentenced him to 5 years in prison. It's
That's crazy.
crazy, man.
And see, the thing is, when you talk about weed that way, it sounds ridiculous. But then if you say like, "Oh, they busted in someone's house and found a kilo of coke or like bundles of heroin everywhere," it seems a little more reasonable. But is it? You know what I mean? Is it really that much more reasonable to be locked in a cage for that?
Well, think about this. If you have a kilo of Coke on you, they're not going to get you for personal use. They're going to get you for intent to sell.
Sure.
And the only reason for anyone to sell drugs is that you can't get it anywhere else, you
Hmm.
know? If you can't get something from a store, you go elsewhere for it. That's just how it is. And humans will seek out and obtain any drugs that they want because it's what we do. It's what we've always done. We're a drug using species.
It's crazy that how vital drugs are to culture and people. Like it's a huge part of what we are as a species. And then it's basically I don't know if it was McKenna that says this. A lot of people say it though. It's crazy that the government makes laws on just altering consciousness. If you don't look at the substance as the problem, what we're doing is using stuff to alter our consciousness. So we don't have control over our own consciousness, which is crazy.
It is crazy. But I think a very important piece of this is, you can't just one day legalize everything and then expect that your society isn't going to have a transitional period with the degree of education that we currently have about drugs. Like think about well, like when I was in middle school, we had we had to go through the DARE program, which is the exact opposite of drug education. It's
Just say
essentially,
no.
yeah, just say
It's
no,
like the
just stay
quote.
away.
It's insane.
That's unrealistic. There's no way.
I mean, people are gonna naturally be curious. I mean, I feel like every person I've ever met has at least tried maybe a drug or 2. I mean, alcohol is usually the common one and weed, but everybody goes through life at least with the curiosity. It's kinda strange when you meet somebody who never tried a drug or never even had the like, you can talk to some people and they never had the desire to. Personally, I just it's hard for me to understand that.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of fear involved with these programs like DARE and they work. Like I know people who have never had the desire to do a drug ever and they never have done a drug. And that's because the fear was put in them early and it was put into them effectively.
That's strange, like, how it works so effectively for some people and others, they're just like, "That's complete bullshit. I wanna go do this now." Like, you tell a lot of people not to do something, it makes them wanna do it more.
Yeah, some people for sure. Yeah, that they definitely have that. Um
But the thing is, like, once you smoke weed for the first time or something, like, after I smoked weed for the first time, and it was like it was almost like a psychedelic, like, it blew my mind, imagine, like, because when you're young, you've never experienced a change of consciousness, and I smoked weed, and I was like blew my whole world open. I was like, "What the fuck was that?" You know what I mean? It was almost like a psychedelic experience, and, when you if a kid has that experience, it's gonna change them. So it's pretty nuts.
Cannabis is it's psychedelic in nature. Like it's not as potent, like, or it's not as like consciousness lasting as like a regular, like traditional psychedelic, but it is psychedelic.
But dude, the first time I smoked it was pretty like,
That's what I
I
mean.
was
Yeah.
I was in a circle like, back in the woods, just in a circle with this, like, crazy homemade gravity bong. And I was like, "Alright, fuck it, I'm gonna smoke it." And I smoked it, and it's weird, I didn't get the effect, like, now if I smoke, the effect comes gradually, like, while you smoke, like, it's happening. I smoked, like, 3 hits, 4 hits or something out of this bong, and nothing happened. But then, like, 5 minutes later, it smacked me in the face, and, like, it was completely different than what it's like for me to smoke now. It was, like, truly psychedelic and, like, crazy, like, bursts of laughter, it was just insane. It was way different than once, you start to get used to it.
In terms of tolerance, not everyone is created equal. You know, some people, you wouldn't want like a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old who like just got their license to who's never smoked weed before to take a few hits of a joint or something and go drive. But someone who has a high tolerance to it and like say smokes every day or has like a medical card and like uses it every day, that person may not or might not or maybe shouldn't have to adhere to the same exact rules as everybody else. And I think that's where the knowledge comes in because there needs to be a certain point in time where we stop looking to rules, governments, and regulations to tell us how to use drugs. We need to be able to make those decisions for ourselves. Like we were talking about earlier today, actually, with drugs, dosage is everything. And if you know your dose, um, that's everything. I when I was taking um, the navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists course through psychedelics today. Um, one of the one of the founders and instructors, Kyle Buller, had told a story where he was somewhere. I forget where he was. He was with like a group of like psychedelically minded people, and they were at some sort of conference or event of some sort where they were all like working together. And he didn't name who the person was, but he said he was outside, like, sharing a cigarette with someone. It was I believe it was a female, and he said, they were just kinda passing the cigarette back and forth, and after a few hits, he went to pass it back to her, and she said, "No, that's okay. That's my dose." And and he was like, "Oh, like, that's interesting," and that really is an interesting way to think about all substances that you take into your body, whether it be caffeine, drugs, tobacco, nicotine, whatever. Like, it's an interesting thing to think about what's my dose for all substances that alter my physiology.
Yeah, and that's where making all drugs legal would be brilliant because the thing is, if you pick a drug, if you use that drug, if it's an illegal drug, the quality varies so much on the street. You don't know what you're getting, like how pure it is. So like you don't know your dose. Like for instance, if you're a heroin user, you could think, "Oh, my dose is 3 bags because I've been getting this heroin," and then you could get some that is pure and then it kills you. You know what I mean? Like there's no way to know what dose is the actual dose that you're getting. You kinda have to wing it, which is really sketchy. And like you look at all the opioid deaths, it's I don't know, it's crazy, but if they just legalized it and let people know what they have, like how strong it is or whatever, it would be common knowledge to be like, okay, if anybody can do 1 bag and not die, anybody. Whereas on the street, there's some, shit where you could do a little bit and it'll kill somebody who's never had it before. So like if there was like a way, like I mean, they do it with, like pills, these opioid pills, like I don't know, if they just legalized all drugs and then actually really educated people on the doses, you would just minimize, like, fatalities from drugs, like, altogether.
Not to mention like initiatives to um, provide drug users with clean needles and clean administration because like that's a big problem too. And I know there's a lot of cities that are doing that. Like they're starting to like have centers pop up where you can go and like get clean needles and you can I think there's even places where you can go and like a doctor will shoot you up essentially like so you can safely do your drug.
But what I was just thinking was how amazing it would be if, as a culture, if we had some type of psychedelic initiation. Like, if it was normal for, like, let's say when you turn 16 to have a psychedelic experience, like, and do it in a way like, I don't know, like, certain cultures did that kinda thing. Like, even with kids, which I don't know, I would say you should probably be, like 16, maybe 18, I don't know.
Because it depends on your maturity level, and within each culture, they have different maturity levels. And then I guess when they consider you turning into like like becoming a man,
Well, that
say
yeah,
that's when like the rite of passage would be.
yeah, that's what I mean, like, a rite of passage, exactly. Some form of that, because there is none of that in our culture. There's not really a thing, like, the closest thing would be, like, driving a car, which
Yeah.
is, like, not very spiritually gratifying or doesn't really, it gives you freedoms and all that, which is great, but there needs to be something to introduce the sacred back into our culture as a whole because we're fucking dying, man.
We're dying here.
It's just so it's so cluttered with like materialistic, values.
Well, think about schooling in general. Like when you go to school, you're not taught how to think. You're not taught how to be a fully formed human. You're not even taught like the whole basis of school is to prepare you for life, but you're not taught how to like even calculate like the percentage of taxes you should be taking like that should be taken out of your paycheck. Like you get no education in the reality of like the real world. What you get is how to be obedient,
Mhm.
how to listen, how to be like a factory worker in the
Well,
1860s.
yeah, that's exactly true, and that's what our school system is based on. It's based on, you know, to be able to work in a factory, and that's kind of I don't know, it's just insane because now, I mean, you don't really need 12 years of school, just like, I could have skipped school altogether and worked in a factory just fine. So it's just like you memorize I mean, once you learn to read and write, I don't know, what's the point after that? I don't know.
I mean, I do believe that like you need a solid foundation of math, of, science, English. Like, I do think that these things are important, but the problem usually is the way that they're taught. It's the curriculum itself, really. I mean, you could effectively teach people the things that they need to be fully formed humans without giving them like curriculum based solely off of multiple choice standardized tests because your school needs funding. Like, that is a system that is not conducive to truly educated people.
No. I don't know, the school system is, in my opinion, I don't really think it's effective at all. I think, like I said, once you and especially now with the internet, once you learn to read and write and you can do math, like, you're pretty much open to learn whatever you want after that point. Like, instead of being forced to learn about stuff that you're gonna just memorize and forget, I don't know. Maybe they should have, like, more specialized schools for people who are interested in certain things rather than cramming everybody together and just kinda tossing them into one classroom and then just memorize and then forget it in a year.
Now with the internet, like, if we had a system that gave you the internet and then taught you how to disseminate information and taught you basically how to use the internet in a way that's going to fulfill your own educational needs. And what that means to me is teaching people the value of knowledge. I think that's the number one thing that was that's the difference between like learning and like schooling, because I didn't learn shit in school. I didn't learn anything. You know, I did what I had to do. I never did my homework and I barely passed tests, you know, that and I got my diploma. I didn't start to actually learn until I realized later in life how fulfilling and how amazing and how much I enjoy learning. And if you can get kids to understand and to see that when they're young, then they have their whole lives to learn and to learn joyfully. But we don't learn joyfully. We're forced to memorize shit that we don't care about and that we're never going to use.
It's crazy because, like, as kids, we're taught to hate learning, basically, which the truth of the matter is that no matter who you are, you love to learn as long as you're learning something you're interested in. But, same as you, until I was out of school, I thought I hated learning just because my whole experience of learning was just cramming bullshit into my head, and none of it I never really used any of it. Other than, I mean, just reading and, math and that basic stuff. I mean, you use that obviously, and it's super important, but all the stuff on top of it is just I mean, I guess history is really important too. History needs to be taught.
But what history should be taught? Because, as you know, the history that we're taught is from the perspective of a certain control mechanism. And I mean, look no further than, say, Graham Hancock and his work with ancient civilizations. For years, since the 90s, this dude has been chastised and called a pseudoscientist, even though he doesn't claim to be a scientist at all. And now he's becoming validated. And
Yeah,
right there, it goes to show like it's really hard to break through the structures that are currently in place, you know, because really, this is the problem with the drugs, it's the problem with our education, because the systems are all rooted in profit and making money. And
capitalism, baby.
that's why you see these some of these drugs starting to become legalized now, like psychedelics and cannabis, because they're finally realizing how much money can be made.
It's a profit motive.
If you go on to like your E-Trade account or whatever, and you look up some of these like psychedelic stocks, there's a lot of money, millions of dollars going into these stocks. So that's how you can tell. You just follow the money, and you'll be able to tell where the trajectory of these things is going.
Yeah, I think you brought up, Graham Hancock, and it's awesome, like, the time we're living in right now because in real time, dude, like, the human history is, like, unraveling. It's amazing. Like, same like we're talking about school, like, growing up in school, we were taught a little bit we had, like, period that we were taught about ancient Egypt and all this, and we were taught about this stuff as if it was fact, like, "Alright, well, the pyramids were tombs, and they were built by slaves, this and that," and it's like, "Okay, we know all this, we know about our past," and then it turns out, in real time, all that stuff is getting debunked, and, like, we really don't know 97% of human history. It's really wild to think about, like, we don't know we we're like Graham Hancock said, we're a species with amnesia. And it's crazy because when you think about it, we don't know anything like clearly up until a couple hundred years. Really wild.
Yeah, we're a species with amnesia that is fueled by our hubris because we think we know. We think we know everything. We think we know all through history. We think we know that Atlantis was not real. That's another one that's interesting. Like, I mean, it might sound like sort of woo-wooey to even talk about the word Atlantis, but when you think about the lost civilizations, like there's so much evidence for massive amounts of meteor and comet impacts. I mean, we don't need to get too much into the impact theories, but there's just so much that goes against what the mainstream like archaeology community is willing to accept because man, they got to get those grants, they really want
Yep.
to get those papers published in science and in nature. So
But it's wild. Like some of the smartest people in history, like were writing about Atlantis. Like so, I think about that, and it's like when we think to people of the past, we assume they were stupid for some reason. So it's like, oh, they were writing about Atlantis, like, but clearly we know that's not real. It's like, why would they put so much time into, writing this stuff down? I don't know. I think there's a lot of evidence that points to like these civilizations being real.
it's that hubris, man. Like we think that we know everything, and we think that because we are smarter in some ways than our parents, and our parents are smarter in some ways than their parents, and that with generations come progress, we think that we can extrapolate that idea to thousands of years, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, especially when you're talking about a possible like, you know, civilization ending event. I mean, forget what it was, but there was some event that happened, thousands of years ago that it ended with like the human civilization being knocked down to like 5,000 people or something.
I think that was the
Was
Younger Dryas
was that the Younger
impact. I
Dryas?
I think so.
Because I know I've heard that. I don't know too much about it, but just imagine like the scariest thing is to realize that that could happen at any time. Like this planet could get hit by a rock. The planet don't give a shit, but people will be wiped off, and then you'll be left. Like, won't kill all of us. There'll be still people left, and it'll take another 10,000 years just to build the population up a little bit.
Did you happen to finish the Randall Carlson Rogan podcast that was just
Yeah,
dropped?
yeah, yeah.
Did you hear when he was going through all of the news stories of like the past few months of
All the
all of the near misses? Like,
yeah near misses.
oh my
It's
god.
terrifying,
It's just outrageous.
and then it makes you think too. Like, if let's say if somebody out there knew that one of these was coming, would they do everything in their power to, keep that a secret from us? Or do you think that it would be, they would just tell everybody? I don't know.
I don't think that if it I don't think we may not have the technology. We definitely don't have the technology. It doesn't seem like to deflect something like that, like depending on the size of it, but we may not even have the technology to see it coming.
Well, I didn't Randall Carlson say that we do have the technology, just not the funding? Or like
That's
basically
such a
like, well,
problem.
that's what I mean. Like theoretically, we could deflect the comet, but we're not preparing for something like that. So technically we couldn't because we're not prepared for it, I guess you'd say.
Feel like that goes for like everything. We could do Humans
That's true.
are so amazing in our technology. And if we decided to, as a global civilization, that we wanted to end all suffering and we wanted to become completely symbiotic with the earth and reduce our carbon footprints to zero, we could do that in six
Hmm.
months. We could.
Well,
We have
this
the
is interesting.
technology to do anything that we want. We just
I
don't have the ability to apply it to things that make a real difference.
But now that's interesting because now I'm thinking, I don't think we could end human suffering. I think that's just a part of
All right, that
that's
may
the
have been a
thing.
romantic
No,
idea.
I know what you mean, but that's just I don't know, it's part of the human experience. It has to be.
Well, let's say we could end the human suffering that goes with dropping bombs on each other and like and inflicting violence on one another.
Even that, dude, do you think that alright, well, at least, maybe this is a cool topic. Do you think that world peace is possible?
I think that yeah, yeah. I don't see why not. Look
Well,
at
I'll tell
every
you why not.
all right, tell
Well,
me.
just because it's never happened before. I mean, if you look at all of human history, all it is little tiny spaces of time in between just, like, murderous wars.
I honestly I beg to differ. I think there was a golden period of time when human beings were symbiotic with nature and our environment, probably in our adolescence, like human adolescence. And I think that what started the downward, well, may not be downward, but the spiral into materialism was the introduction of farming. Because when you're like a nomadic culture and you're moving around from place to place, you don't have this notion of like this is mine and this is yours. Like, you get off my lawn. So when you have a farm though, and you realize and you discover that you can plant crops and you can feed your family, when you start to become more sedentary as a lifestyle, you claim ownership over, like, your property, say, like, like, "I'm gonna settle here, and this is my property. You settle over there, and that's your property." And then we start to claim ownership over things, and that's where, like, quarrel begins. But when you're not in a position to do that, like, to claim ownership over things, and to distinguish between, people and tribes and things of that nature, I feel like there was a golden age of humans being symbiotic with the earth, and I think that's probably the definition of prosperity, right? In terms of like nature.
Well, to go into that a little bit, well, you think back to when we first came to America, colonized America, we showed up, and one of the things that started, like, the war between the colonizers and the natives was the deal that they made over Manhattan. So, like, the Americans, they bought Manhattan from the Native Americans. Oh, they gave them a bunch of pelts and shit, like ships full of stuff, and they said, "Okay, now we can have this land." But the Native Americans had no concept of property. So, not long after that, they came back and wanted their land back. And the Americans are like, "No, we bought this. This is our property now." And see, they didn't understand the concept of property. So that's kinda like what you were saying. But they were still killing each other. The tribes were killing each other without the concept of property, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
I'm
like,
I more so was like speaking on like even before that. Like when we're still like it's almost
well,
like
I
the
know it
stoned ape McKenna theory. At the time that we were in that period of stoned ape time, that's I think when that was the moment of the golden age of humans.
yeah, well, maybe. I mean,
I mean, it's just my
I
weird
would make
opinion.
I'd make a bet that people were always killing each other. But the thing is, my point was that basically, even if a culture doesn't have the concept of property, they're still killing each other. I think it's just in our nature to I mean, think about it, there's never been a time where you could go somewhere on the earth and people are killing each other.
And all animals do it, right?
Yeah,
All
it's
animals
like
are
just a
territorial and
part of and it I think and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
but I think it becomes a bad thing when you skip up millions of years or thousands of years to like the Iraq war.
Well, sure,
You know what I mean?
that's bad for us, like, and our egos, but when you think of the universe as an intelligent mind, like, you gotta figure the universe knows better than our egos.
Well, I mean, I like to think of it as like a disease, just because like if the earth is an intelligent mind
Not just
and
the universe.
we're or if the universe or the earth is some sort of because like I tend to think along the lines that like the earth is some sort of like unified organism. And if there's a unified organism with some cells on it that are not performing the tasks that they are supposed to perform and they're sort of diseased, maybe turning to cancer or turning to some autoimmune disease, that could be translated to what we're doing. Just because it happens and just because violence is in our nature doesn't mean that it should be happening to the degree that it is happening and with the motivations that we carry it out with, because that to me is a hindrance on like the guy in mind or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that I don't know, if you look at the universe as an infinite intellect and it is supremely intelligent, everything that's kind of the way of thinking that everything happens for a reason or everything that's happening is happening the only way it could and exactly how it should happen. It's like if you take yourself out of the ego and just kind of realize that it might be in better hands than you could, because if you think about it, you'd be like, "Oh, I could make the world a much better place if people just listened and, we stopped the war and this and that." But that assumes that the universe isn't already in a higher position of intelligence than you. So maybe, all this stuff that we consider bad is just relative to us, and it could be part of a greater plan that the universe has that, we just don't see through our ego mind.
Seems to me to be a little bit of both. I think that
Well, there's definitely I agree with you too. There's definitely both there, but in the grand scheme of things, I believe that everything is happening perfectly. And the improvements that you're talking about probably should happen, and we believe that, and they probably will, or hopefully they will, but it could get a lot worse. I mean, I believe that things are not as in our control as we'd like them to be. I mean, like we were just saying, dude, a comet could hit the planet in a week, and all these problems we're talking about are completely gone.
so that's to say that, do you think that if we were obliterated from, say, our physical forms were obliterated from this physical reality, do you think that all the things that we did mean nothing?
I mean, kind of.
Like they have no impact?
Well, kind of. The way I'd put it is that there's no such thing as good or bad. Everything is exactly perfect how it is always. And that's like an insight that I've gotten from psychedelics that, everything you think is good or bad is really just your ego mind judging, an already infinite intellect. So I believe that everything happens is perfect and all of our suffering is doesn't actually happen to what you'd call the true self that only the ego suffers. So the formless, the true self, the infinite intellect, God, whatever you is absolute perfection, and it is everything, and it's always happening, and there is no suffering. It's only the ego that suffers.
So if you believe that consciousness is primary, do you also
You want to
believe
explain that just a tiny bit?
well, yeah, okay. So consciousness being primary would be like a panpsychist view, where the materialist view is that the brain creates consciousness within itself depending on which neurons are firing when and each chemical interaction that's happening within the brain. Panpsychism or consciousness being primary is more like the an easy way to understand it is like the brain is like a TV and the broadcast is consciousness and the TV is sort of tuning into it.
I don't have a panpsychist view because my view is that like consciousness is fundamental over matter. And see, that couldn't be true if the brain is tuning into consciousness. That would assume that you need a matter brain to tune in to this thing called consciousness.
Let me ask you a question. Why does one have to be fundamental over the other? Why? Because to me,
See,
it's, I always look at things as a this and that, not as things as a this and then that, or like one thing is bigger than the other in these realms. To me, it's both. It's
be,
both are equal.
well, because that's why I said I didn't want to talk about this yet because I want to be able to lay out my argument. Because then I have to debunk the other argument, which I can't do right now.
Yeah, yeah, I understand.
I
But
have to have my shit laid out. But
so, well, my
it
my
has to
initial
be that way. Is my point. It has
my
to. You can't.
my initial question when I brought up consciousness being primary was, if you think that consciousness is primary, then wouldn't that mean that the things that we do while we're bodies in, inhabiting consciousness, observing itself, or however you want to look at it, doesn't that mean that the things that we do have some sort of an impact or an importance to consciousness in itself, which would sort of debunk the thought that if we were all obliterated in an instant, then all the things that we've ever done and all the things that we've ever been have no effect or have no meaning.
Well, see, that's the thing when you first, like, let me go back a little bit to what I was saying that because you were saying that the brain tunes into consciousness,
Well, that's
and
one way of looking at consciousness being primary.
but that's what I'm saying. I'm saying not at all. I'm saying that the brain is just it's not actual like consciousness is actually all that there is. And the brain is really just concept. It's not truth, it's just a concept that you're thinking of right now. The only thing that is true is this moment right now. The eternal now is everything. And this stuff isn't really matter, that's just concept that we create to understand what's happening or to kind of create this narrative that we have like, okay, like you look at your hand like, okay, I know that this is built of atoms. But is it, or is Adam something we created just to try to understand what's happening in this moment?
Just because we create or construct the word atom and we write out a definition for it and teach people what that definition is, doesn't mean that the atom itself or the thing that we're observing isn't real.
Well,
And
I'm
I
not
think
saying
that's the
it's
problem with
real.
what you're looking
No,
at.
it's real as a concept, but it's not truth. It's not what you're not actually made of atoms. Because there's also the entanglement problem that physics proved that these things don't exist without quantum entanglement. You need an instrument to entangle with in order for it to create the thing. It doesn't exist without the mechanism or without the tool you're using to view it or whatever. It doesn't even exist. So like that's proven. And
By
people
doesn't exist, what do you mean? I think it's funny that we just said we weren't going to get into this and now we're getting into it.
well because quantum entanglement is why because it was proved. See, this is why I wanted to have notes and stuff so I could lay it out properly. But what it proved was that, like, a particle or whatever doesn't exist basically without the instrument you're using to view it. It doesn't even exist. So, it's literally not real unless you're using the instrument that entangles yourself with it.
We're gonna have an episode that goes over all of this, and we're gonna get really deep into it. But my essential question was based off of what you said earlier, which was that if we didn't if we were obliterated from the planet, then everything that we've done means nothing. And I think that's not true because when it's sort of like what we do, who we are, the love that we give, however you want to gauge our purpose on this planet, I think it directly feeds back into the consciousness of the species at large, sort of like Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance.
Mhm.
So what that does is it gives us equal responsibility for our actions while still acknowledging that our species consciousness is primary. So it's like we're feeding our intelligence, our knowledge, our emotions, our experiences back into the source of consciousness. That's the way that I sort of look at it. And in that way, what we do in this life matters and it has some sort of an impact on the greater.
I mean, see, me personally, I don't really have a belief into, like, a necessarily, like, we have a purpose necessarily. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, for me, that's all seems like it's concept and imagination, really.
But see, what is
'Cause
anything without concept and imagination? All we have is what our minds can concoct.
but
Even
if
when we talk about like consciousness being primary, or every single thing that comes out of our mouth is concept, and what we're doing is we're placing language on the world, and we're defining things as language no
well,
matter
right,
what you
and
do.
well, that's what I'm saying, all language isn't gonna work either, it just doesn't work because language is constructed out of dualities. Language isn't its purpose isn't to discuss or know the truth, that's not the purpose of language. Language is a survival tool. So this is all the language you could use is built of dualities, and my main point is there are no dualities. So there's no way for language to really accurately articulate the truth. But when you look at it like from a non-dual perspective, all dualities collapse. So like everything that we're talking about is really just concept and imagination. Like the non-dual perspective would say that really all that exists is yourself, and that's all there actually is. And the thing is, if you reach that state, like you can do it with psychedelics, you can come to a realization of really only one thing existing, which is you, and it's just love. That's basically like a shitty version of non-dual.
The way I look at non-dual, so you said that non-duality, it collapses dualism. And again, we're gonna have an episode about this too, because I
Yeah,
think we really need to. But what I do want to say is that I think a better way to look at it is non-duality cements duality as form. It's like
right. And
form and
non-duality is formless. Like
yeah, yes, but you can't have the formless without the form.
here, let me explain consciousness. Let me try to use an analogy for consciousness. So, and this is basically what you are. So imagine a ball of clay. On a ball of clay, you can make infinite shapes with. So you can, mold it however you want and, build literally anything with this clay. So that's basically what consciousness is. But imagine the clay not being made of matter, not having a color to it. So it's basically it's emptiness that can be formed into anything
So where does our yearning for purpose and meaning come from?
from our egos.
So do you think it's misplaced and we shouldn't yearn
No,
for a purpose or a
I
meaning?
don't think it's misplaced or anything like that. I just think that it's part of the game that we're playing. I mean, I just don't think that there's any way to really prove that it's concrete and real. It's just concept and imagination. It's things that we're placing on top of reality. It's not actually integral to reality.
Do you think that really matters? Like, do you think it matters if it's real? Or like
None of
honestly, it's like what is real then? Then what's the definition of real? Is it
your hand is real. Just the hand, not the word hand, not all the stuff that you place on top of it. That's like one of the meditations I'll do is just look at the hand and pull away everything you know about it. You just pull away that it's yours. It's not your hand. It's not made of atoms. You pull away all the concept and imagination that you place on top of this. And then what you're left with is truth. What you're left with when you're looking at it is just the thing itself, nothing attached to it, and that's what's true. All the other stuff you think when you're looking at it is concept and imagination.
so what that is that is a method of coming to truth or a method of coming to non-duality.
Yeah, it's
So
just a meditation
yeah, but see the method itself, I think there's a distinction that has to be made between the method and the truth itself because the method is to deconstruct your hand. Sure, like that is a method, but that doesn't necessarily discount the reality of the physical hand. You know what I mean? Those two things must exist as form and formless simultaneously to exist as anything, like to
Well, yeah,
exist as a non-dual state.
all you're doing is just seeing it for what it is rather than all your ego ideas and everything that you place on it. So it's not changing anything. It's just recontextualizing what you're looking at and to see it for what it is rather than, all the attachments that you place on top of it.
Yeah, it's like incorporating both sides, the material and the non-material into like one like full frame of reference, right? Seems like.
It's just an exercise to kinda get you to thinking around those lines, because the thing is what we're rational minded, and, like, rationality is a great tool for survival and to innovate and all this stuff, but the thing is, in order to, like, get to, like, a non-dual state or to try to see things in a different way, it's impossible because it's not in our nature, but you have to not question the process and not, like, you just gotta get rid of your rational mind for a while. And, like, the thing is, you're like, "Well, no, my rational mind doesn't want me to do that." That's We have to think rationally and, like, I have to use my mind and ideas, but the whole point is to just trust the process and throw that shit out and do it anyway, and then you can come to a realization but you have to throw out all rational thought, like, you have to get rid of it, and you have to practice it a lot in order to and it's like it's almost impossible, but you can do it with enough practice, but there's always gonna be a rational thought to debunk it or rationalize your way out of it, but it doesn't change what's actually there.
I mean, I keep coming back to the non-physical being informed by the physical, and the physical being informed by the non-physical. Like it's a it's like a unity, a
But
unity of
see, that's
duality
the
sort
thing,
of
that's
thing.
like an imagined duality, though.
But if it's to say it's an imagined duality is this is like you're still putting this is the problem with language. It's like no matter what you say, even if you say that it's a non-duality, it's like you're still putting this this concept on it. That's why we can't put a finger on what reality is because we're trying to use language to describe it because we don't have any other means of communicating to one another about it.
Well, that's why I'm saying, like, the only way to really know it is by experiencing it and getting rid of you have to get rid of all your objections and all your rational thought that tells you that it's stupid and it doesn't make sense, and of course there's physical and non-physical, like, of course that's real, but you have to throw that out anyway.
In order to understand the full scope of reality. Yep, I feel
Yeah,
you.
it's but that's why I think one of the best exercises is the hand just staring at your hand, and then by the time you're done, and you might be looking at it for an hour, you're not looking at your hand anymore. Quite literally, you're not looking at your hand. It's not what it is because that's just the stuff that you think you're putting on top of it. Like, what we're looking at right now, we have so much concept and ideas that we put on top of everything, but this is just our perception right now. It's not exactly what the truth is behind everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that so when we grow up, when we start off in this world as little babies and we look at the world around us and we're just filled with wonder and we don't have any descriptions for what we're seeing. We don't say that's a tree and that's a door and that's a person. Like we just it's just full sensory input without the label of language on objects. Do you think that that's a more pure way of thought than when like children like if you start to tell your child, "Okay, that over there, that's a squirrel." Do you think that labeling something as a word removes the mystery and the wonder of that thing?
Uh, I don't know. I don't think so. I kinda see what you're saying in a sense, you think it kinda does, but it's hard to say that because it's like because as a child, you might be closer to some type of truth that you're unaware of, but the thing is, the way I look at it is that everything has to be this way, and you have to just I don't know, I don't think there's any, like, answer to that. I think you just have to do the work to understand it. I don't know. I don't really know. Fundamentally, do you believe that life has purpose or that there is, like, an ultimate purpose that is true, or do you find it to be, like, a subjective thing that you create?
My answer to that is my answer to like most things, which is both. I think it's a
Okay.
little bit of both. I put I put a responsibility on the human to find and align themselves with the path of progress that is defined by like the larger capital P purpose. Because things don't organize in the way that life is organized without a purpose. I think that is a materialist and sort of atheistic thought is that nothing matters, there's no purpose, there's no reason. It all of this just is. And I do love the concept of isness, but I like that concept. And notice I'm saying I like it's just
Mhm.
opinion. But I like that concept in a way, but not in a way where it discounts purpose and meaning. Because again, when something like life um, sorts itself out in a way that we're seeing happen, in my view, there's definitely a purpose. And when I have been in the throes of my personal spiritual experiences, I felt that. It's not a way that I can put into words. It wasn't like words were conveyed to me, but there's a I had an experience once, real quick. I want to tell this. So I had an experience once where it felt as if I was being given the feeling that, again, we are a species with amnesia and we have forgotten our role within the grand scheme of everything. And the grand scheme of everything is trying to communicate it back to us to remind us what our role in this whole thing is. That's the only way that I can put words to the feeling that I had, but it felt so real and it felt so perfect and so true that it really has informed the way that I view this subject.
So would like I'm gonna try to say it back to you maybe. So would you say like the purpose could be almost just to align yourself with that frequency of like goodness, like just to be aligned with that? Is that what you're saying kind of? Like
Sort of, yeah.
to be in alignment with that, whatever that, because I have a similar view. Like when I had my that my one DNT experience where I experienced, just this ultimate love and stuff. I think the only thing like a purpose I could find out of that was just to align myself with that. And and that would be kind of like an ultimate good. I don't know.
And that means something. That right there that you just said, that's what I'm talking about. You can feel that. It feels real. And again, you can't really put words onto it, but that is the general concept. Yeah, that there's there's some trajectory of individual evolution as deeply as possible. Like that's what my the way the way that I define like if someone says like what's the meaning of life? My answer to that, I got this from Duncan Trussell's mom. She said something along the lines that the meaning of life is to evolve as deeply as possible from the day you're born to the day you die. And what that phrasing does is it allows for any variety of things to mean evolving as deeply as possible. It depends on who you are, your culture, your viewpoints, everything. It's very individualized. So I think that is a good way of saying like aligning yourself with the thing that helps you to evolve as deeply as possible in a way that benefits like the capital P purpose, whatever that is.
Right. So it'll be different for everybody.
And different for each species. I think it's not just special to us. I think we do have a vast difference in our potential, in our like ceiling. Like I think our ceiling is way higher than any other species, but I do think that this applies to all life. So how do you answer that question? Like how do you feel? Like do you think that there's no purpose or there's no meaning? Like do you agree with the way that I look at it at all, or like do you understand like what I'm like where I'm coming from?
I mean, I understand and I kind of agree, but at the same time, I don't think there are any shoulds for anybody. Like, there's not like you, because like I can say that, yeah, you should try to align yourself to the ultimate good, but not all people do that. And it's completely perfect that way. Like, everything is perfect as is. So, the purpose for me is just to be and just, and like you said, it can be different for every person, I guess. But I don't think that I don't think that there's one.
No, I totally agree. That's essentially what I'm saying by evolve as deeply as possible is that it means a different thing for every person. And that might mean you never have a spiritual moment in your life ever. That's your path, that's your cause, and that's your way of evolving as deeply as possible within this current incarnation. It might mean something different for us. We may define it as spiritual emergence. Like when I asked Michelle Hobart um, if spiritual emergence was desirable, if it was something that people should go for and go after, or should it be, you know, tentatively approached? And she said her answer to that was, I think it's why we're here. And for me, that resonates. And for her, that resonates. Like that seems to be in alignment with what I think, but that doesn't apply to all people. And I do think that we need all people. We have to appreciate all paths, and we have to approach everyone and their viewpoints with love and compassion.
Yeah, I agree with that. But that see, when you ask that question, I kinda think I go to the thought of, good being relative, and like I said, everything being perfect as is, and it cannot not be that way. So, like, something that you would consider evil is actually good and loving and perfect as is. So, like so it's hard to try to put words to, like, a meaning when it's possible to think that Hitler was doing good and being loving. You know, like, certain things that we look at as evil actually aren't and are actually perfect, and the way they're happening is the best way possible. Even if in that moment the ego thinks that it's bad or evil, that's just you placing your idea of perfection over the universe's.
Absolutely. I totally, totally agree. And it's you putting your idea of what a path should be on everybody else instead of accepting them for who they are and what they are from a place of compassion. Because the only way that you can look at Hitler and say what he's doing is not hate, it's actually love, because hate doesn't exist. The only way to come to that conclusion is from a place of compassion. It's the only way. And I think that is the only way to conduct yourself in a way where you're accepting of everyone and you're understanding of everyone and not placing judgments on what's better and what's worse depending on like what you think is what's better and what's worse.
Right, because I've said this before that hate doesn't exist. It's all there is love because hate is a twisted form of love. That's all it is. And why do you hate anything? It's just because you love something else. So when you're acting out of hate, it's actually acting out of love. Like we go to the Hitler example. He hated, Jews or this and that, but what it really was his love for Germany and the German people and probably himself and his ego. So like it's still fundamentally acting out of love. He wouldn't have hated anything if he didn't have the love for something else. So when you look at it that way, so you could rationalize your way to a lot of this stuff too, but it doesn't change the fact of the matter. It is true that love is the driving force of everything. And that's not just love the emotion or like what you feel for the people that you're close to in life. It's everything you do is actually it's love.
It is, yeah. Every single thing you do, you can size it down to anything as minuscule or as large as possible, and you can come up to the with the same conclusion.
Yeah. And the thing is a lot of people will kinda reject that idea and think that hate is a real thing, but you have to understand people's capacity to have love for their love of their ego. So, that's the thing, people commit some acts that might seem hateful, but it's really because they love their ego so much. So that it's still acting out of love, but it's usually where what you would consider negative, it usually comes from obsessing over the ego, I'd say.
Yeah, and in my opinion, in my physical reality, in this manifestation of my karma, I feel like anything that results in human suffering is wrong. That's just the way that I conduct myself because within my belief systems, that's the way I evolve as deeply as possible.
Yeah, that's I mean, I could say that's universally true for most people, what you
Mhm.
would think. But the key is to realize that, everything is all good and it's perfect as is.
Dude, I could not agree more. And that may be the perfect place to end it because everything is perfect, which means the duration of this podcast has been perfect. I'm perfect, you're perfect, and all of you guys are all perfect.
Yeah, meditate, people.
Love yous. Bye.
Adios.